Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted on this Thursday to have a new face. Peter McGackie joins us. You're sitting there with your lime green away kit on there, Peter. Welcome to the show. How are you doing, pal?
I'm good. Glad to be on.
Superb. We're looking forward to it. And of course, Matthew is a veteran, having appeared for the first time last week. Matthew Marr, you're back to talk all things Celtic, and we'll have a wee chat about what's just happened over the weekend, the fallout from that game, which I think 5 days on, it continues. And obviously a nice wee look ahead to this weekend's game against Kilmarnock and what challenges that might bring. Jungle Lion, one of the first commenters every single day, Jungle Lion. Always great to see you. Still smiling 5 days later. Back over in Ireland, having been over in Glasgow for the game. It was great to see you outside the stadium, and hopefully you can come over a few more times this season to enjoy what is looking like a potential treble. Now, Peter, we dare to dream. We're fans. We're allowed to dream of a treble. It would be an incredible run, trophy run, bar one blip in that trophy run for Celtic. The domination seems to be continuing. Are you the type of person that likes the one game at a time mentality, or do you dream beyond that and think about Hampden finals and trebles?
I'm a bit of a dreamer. I like to, I sort of have it in the back of my mind. I'm like, if we get through that game, then we're a game away sort of thing. But it does have to come down to one game at a time, really. But to be honest, the league is won, so it is down to one game. No disrespect to the other teams in the Scottish Cup, but it's all about that semi-final, and we know that anything can happen. But from what's happened in the last few Celtic Rangers games, we should have the confidence to go, even if we play bad, if we're not at it, we've still got goals in us and we can still win the game. So it's one game at a time now, but it's really just sort of manoeuvring the squad into that position for the semi-final. So really all about 2 weeks' time, that could be another treble in the bag.
You see the thing there, Peter, I tend to agree with that. I think in the last 3 games, anyway, Matthew, Celtic against Rangers, Celtic have not been at their best. And I think at the weekend there, that was probably the best performance from Rangers against Celtic. And we weren't at the peak of our powers, I believe. Do you buy that? Do you think that is the case? And obviously, if we do turn up and we do turn on in the semi, then we could be looking towards another treble. That one's for you, Matthew.
Oh, is that for me? Sorry.
That's for you, mate. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think I thought the really positive. I mean, obviously, the really positive thing about Saturday was winning. But I think you're right about this idea of the level of consistency that we've had. We've not in the last 3 games that we've played against Rangers, so the 3 games this season. I think we're capable of playing better. I think the game at Ibrox, I think Greg Taylor going off in that game there was a big loss. It sort of it hurt the shape of the team. The Hampden final was actually very comfortable. We weren't at our best, but not in the sense, I think, because we never really needed to be. I think we were playing at a level, it was putting us comfortably ahead. But I think if you look at what happened in the 10 minutes after Rangers scored at Hampden, and I think if you look at last week as well, I think they're actually positive in the sense of reminding you that you can't just expect to turn up. I thought there was a wee bit on Saturday where when we scored the third, the fans were delighted, obviously, and everyone, the whole stadium was doing the huddle, and I thought there was a wee bit where it was a bit like the team got involved mentally in that. The idea 3-1, game's over. If anything, I mean, I spoke to my friend after the game as we were walking up to the pub, and his line was, to be honest, at 3-1, I was thinking this is going to be 4 or 5. There was no danger Rangers were going to score again. Rangers had given up. And I think psychologically, we let them back into it on Sunday. And I think on balance, that was no bad thing ahead of the semi. We do need a reminder that if we turn up and play to the best of our ability, we're easily the better team. We should easily be in a final, hopefully on for the treble. But we actually do need to turn up. We can't just sort of think, well, we've played them 3 times this year, we're unbeaten, we'll win this game as well. So certainly I thought Saturday in many ways was the perfect result because firstly we won, 12 points clear, you're really touching distance to the title. But more importantly, I think there's a reminder to the team that actually, if you think you can just turn up and win, then you're going to be disappointed at the end. And hopefully that's the kick that we need. And hopefully fitness will change lots of things for the final or for the semi as well.
I think it's a great point, that. Just a little reminder, a wee jag to say, don't take your foot off the pedal. Let's stick to the mantra, we never stop. And at 3-1, I did think we were comfortable. I put maybe the fact they got back into the change of shape again. Ange tried to change it slightly, realised it wasn't really working. Rangers get back into it. We go back to their tried and tested shape. And then I think, we could have extended that lead if Bernabei had his shooting boots on, etc. But yeah, it's a good point. And by the way, I said just a minute or two ago about talking about winning the treble. At no point would I underestimate if and when we get there, Inverness or Falkirk, because it's just not in the makeup of Ange Postecoglou. I'm keen to get some of the comments coming in. David Boyle, welcome back. You're watching on YouTube. Anyone out there who wants to comment, who hasn't yet subscribed, just click the subscribe button and get your comments into us. Ali's impact has been fantastic. We're talking about Alistair Johnston here. I feel we just need some proper speed in midfield and another explosive winger, and we will make a real impact in Europe. I predicted yesterday that Real Madrid would win on a higher aggregate score against Chelsea than they did against us, which is 8-1. So they're going to have to beat them 6-0 at Stamford Bridge after last night's performance. But yeah, David's looking ahead to Europe, and we will be talking about Alistair Johnston and the impact he's made since he came to the club. I always love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. And Terry Ward, all the way from, I hope I get this right, is it Gilo in Norway? So hopefully you're enjoying that, the homeland of Ronnie Dyler. Did I get that horribly wrong, Matthew? I probably did. Should have stuck in it, geography.
Bizarrely, funnily enough, I used to write for the Norwegian Celtic Supporters Club Fansy. I wrote for them for about 15. Yeah, I did. I started when I was a teenager. That's how long ago it was. I'm sure I was about 16 or 17 when I started, and I did it for about 10 years. But I wouldn't claim that now mean, they translated my my words into Norwegian, so I don't know if I can help too much in terms of pronunciation.
Did you say it was for 15 years that you wrote for the fanzine? That's some undertaking. Well done for that. Brilliant.
It was in I remember there was an article, and there was a thing in Not the View going back to about 95 or 96 from them saying, do you want to write for us? And this is obviously in the days before social media and all that type of stuff, and I just sort of felt, I quite fancy doing that. So yeah, I'm sure I've still got them somewhere, some of the fanzines, but yeah, it was quite a funny thing to do, even though I can't speak Norwegian and have never been.
That's superb. I love Not the View. I could do an entire show on Not the View. John Clements, who, yes, it is Leonard Cohen. Prediction: we will win the league before the split. They will drop points against St Mirren, and Bad Robson's Aberdeen will beat them at Pittodrie. Amen. I'll tell you what, if there's maybe 3 teams outside of Celtic who are on form, it's certainly St Mirren, Aberdeen, and I would maybe suggest Motherwell. And there might be a few hiccups along the way. That's something that wouldn't surprise me, John. And obviously, after the game, let's talk about after the game, there has been nothing short of a meltdown in relation to the reaction, Peter, after our win at the weekend there. Yeah, I think there's this realisation that, if they wanted to, stay within touch and distance, they had to win that game. It didn't happen. We're going towards the league. There are people behind the scenes leaving the club, and there has been something of a meltdown. The worst part of that, of course, was what's been happening with Kevin Clancy as well, Peter.
It's just it's an accumulation of things for Rangers, I think, and that was the last chance at keeping any sort of hope for the league. Even if they won it, it would have still been 6 points. We have about 7 games to go. So basically, being beat, it's 12 points. Obviously, there's a lot of excuses and pointing at Morelos' push and the Jota handball and things like that. But it's just sort of like clutching at straws. Do you know what I mean? I think it's always going to happen in the aftermath of that. It's just been good to listen to be honest with you. I've actually really enjoyed it. I love these weeks when you win. You can just sit back, relax, and watch the meltdown. And then you're seeing people. It was a bit like Celtic after we lost the 10, and a lot of things were happening, and a lot of people started leaving the club. But we were supposed to fold like a pack of cards, but we've come back pretty strong, and I think all the work's to do in Rangers then to try and catch us up again.
Yeah, you're right. It was like a leg break and then coming back, Larson-esque, coming back stronger. It seemed to happen. We needed that refresh, that reset almost. We have come back stronger. But again, I don't want to focus too much on it unless it affects Celtic. Some of the coverage, though, Matthew, I mean, you've obviously written for fanzines in Norway. You've written your first book. And the best thing you try to achieve in writing is to be as balanced as possible, Matthew. And some of the things I've been reading has been off the scale. I mean, Kenny Miller has gone into an absolute meltdown. He started referencing pushes in games that happened 7 years ago. The big thing for me is, I keep saying to anybody who's on the fence with that Morelos one, is if Johnston's behind Morelos and Morelos goes down like that, right, it's a penalty. And if any Rangers fan or any commentator who tries to deny that that's a penalty is basically just fixed with their blinkered kind of opinion. Matthew, let's have a wee chat, because you've not had a chance certainly on here to talk about it. What was your take on that incident in the game?
I thought, I sit at the other end of the ground, just above where the Green Brigade are. And I thought instantly it was a foul. And I thought it purely because of the body language of Johnston. Johnston is essentially, he's standing up clearly with Morelos. And then he goes down, and he doesn't go down in that way, where people are sort of going down in installments to try and get something. It was the way that 1 minute he was standing up, the next second he was lying sort of prone on the floor. And even at the time, I thought that's a foul. Even when it went to a potential VAR review, I wasn't particularly worried. I just sort of thought he's quite clearly pushed him. I think the fact that you see it on TV and it's even more blatant, the simple reality is you can't put two hands on a player. I mean, there's no middle ground on the issue. There's no aspect where you think, if it had been a shoulder, if he'd sort of if he'd leaned into him with a shoulder, you can arguably say, well, Johnston needs to be a bit stronger. And he probably does need to be. But the reality is, if you put two hands up and do that to an opponent, it's a foul. I mean, it's a pure and simple foul. And obviously you mentioned sort of Kenny Miller and stuff like that. There's no doubts that some of the stuff has been absolutely insane. I think Rangers, the Rangers statement, fairly similar, astonishing. I mean, I suppose it's astonishing if you really sincerely believed you were going to get something out of the game. But for anyone else, and I think your point, Paul, is absolutely right. The reality is, if the scenario had been reversed, if Alistair Johnston had done that to Morelos and they hadn't got a penalty, that would be what would be. That's what the screams would be about just now. So unambiguously, it was a foul. There's no question whatsoever about it. And yeah, there's nothing really more to argue about. Thought it at the time. Thought it since I've seen it again.
For sure. I mean, we had a good discussion yesterday, Peter, about a different reality in Scottish football, whereby we have full-time referees first and foremost, which I think is an absolute must for the professional game. There's far too much at stake to have what in effect are just amateur refs coming in as a second job to pick up a wage. And yeah, I'm pretty sure they enjoy the game and they enjoy the job, but you need professionalism at that level of the game. And Colin and I spoke yesterday and disagreed yesterday about bringing in neutral refs from elsewhere. And potentially, Peter, it happened because some of the refs leave the game, they're bullied out, there's strike action getting spoken about and all this kind of stuff. Where do you see it going from here? Because it almost seems like something of a watershed moment. Do you think anything will change, Peter? I
don't know. I mean, it could. If it goes the way it goes in every Rangers Celtic game, there's issues that like this are going to happen, then the authorities will have to step in and maybe look at something like that. But to make the transition easier, you've got VAR, you get people working VAR. I think you need to have, if it's a professional sport, you need to have professional referees involved. So you need to make them full time, and you need to get them trained up properly, and maybe 8 hours a day working as referees, looking at VAR. That's a full-time job, instead of like doing your other job, because you couldn't go and do a job and then just come and do something part-time at the weekend, especially something that's so many people's lives revolve around, and so much is invested in it. And so either they need to look at putting people full-time, or if the standard isn't there, then could they look at bringing people abroad when we've been refereed? And I mean, there's some bad European referees, but generally when you see the standard of like maybe Champions League and stuff, it's a lot higher standard. So could you look at bringing somebody in? I don't know if it'll ever happen. I don't know how Scottish football would look at that or no, but it would be interesting to see. But what happens if they then make mistakes? Do you know what I mean? There's that sort of. Then you go, what's the point even bringing them in? I think the best way would just be to get our refs full time, and try and make less mistakes. Listen, there's a lot of complaining about mistakes. I've sat and watched Celtic the whole season, and the decisions have been some of them have been absolutely shocking against Celtic. And talk about consistency and things like that. To bring VAR in halfway through the season is just wild. So I want to go back through all the decisions that I think Celtic have had against them, but definitely the refs need to be full time, I think.
Yeah, that's something I would always support. Anyone who wants to have a look through some of these decisions. I know that Alan Morrison, who appears once a month on a Friday on a Celtic State of Mind, he runs his Celtic by Numbers blog, and he's been writing an ongoing dossier almost of all these decisions. So check it out. What I tend to find, Matthew, is that sometimes, and maybe it's because the game is so fast paced, the media will focus on one specific subject and one issue. And what we've been doing over the last few weeks is saying, well, right, we've got a situation at the moment where Celtic players aren't safe at Ibrox, right? And some of the examples that were used is broken glass in the goal mouth, batteries being thrown at Lee Griffiths, a fan somehow being able to attack Scott Brown and then being returned to his seat, that kind of thing. So the players are not safe. The Celtic staff are not safe, i.e., Fran Alonso's getting headbutted. There's a bottle thrown from the club deck and it hits the physio. And then Celtic fans are not safe. And that's the reason why Celtic are refusing to take tickets for Ibrox. And then now the officials are not safe. And then so it's a much wider issue here, Matthew. But I don't see that being discussed a great deal in the mainstream. They're just looking at each individual incident. Sometimes they don't even focus for any great length of time on the incident and they move on. But when you look at the accumulation of all these issues, there's a huge issue here. There's a huge problem. We're talking intimidation, threats, bullying, harassment, and something has to be done about it. Do you think we have the people with the fibre to do that, to actually challenge this?
See, there's an interesting comparison, and the comparison would be Donald Trump at the last election. And the reason is there's an argument that democracy is only as strong as the loser's willingness to accept it. You know, it's easy if you win, for example, in an election to say that election was fair. But obviously, if you want a system that actually works and is effective, then it requires the person who loses an election to say, I lost, I didn't have enough support, I didn't have the right ideas, and so on. And if you don't get that, as you've seen, and as you continue to see with Donald Trump, you begin to really chip away at the very structure of the political system. I think football, there's an aspect with that as well. Fans are never going to be anything other than one-sided. That's just the reality. I don't mean an individual fan, but I mean collectively, fans are clearly going to focus on this helped my team, hooray, or this hurt my team, and so it's terrible, it's a conspiracy, or whatever the case may be. I think though there's then a responsibility on the club. The reality was Rangers at the weekend lost for the simple reason, the reality is they're not good enough. As we've just discussed it, the foul on Johnston to me was a foul. You can make, I suppose if you're a Rangers fan, you can make that you're going to argue the other way. The Jota handball clearly is not a handball. I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing, and it's weird the fact that they continued it into Monday, even after presumably they must have seen that clearly there wasn't a handball. So the reality is, in that game with Clancy, in terms of major things, I mean, I could complain. I think some Rangers players got away with fouls, that perhaps we seem to get booked for earlier. I don't think there was a grand conspiracy in that. I just think that, at times there's an inconsistency which will remain even if you make them full time. Where I think there is an onus, though, is on the clubs to be responsible in how they respond to things. There's a difference between a manager in the heat of a moment sort of saying, well, I thought we maybe didn't get a decision that we should have got, and a club club officially coming out and saying, we demand official explanations. And then even when they get an official explanation, continuing that. And I think that there is an issue of responsibility. It's fair enough for fans to be unreasonable, because that's what fans are. But I think when the clubs themselves, or when the club, in this case Rangers, is stepping over that line, then I think that is where there's a bigger problem. And you can ask you, what does that potentially lead to in the longer term?
It's a great point, because, as you say, they wrote this letter, an official document to seek answers. They get their answers, Matthew. It's not what they want. So they release a further statement to say how astonished they are with those answers. So you're right, they continue to stoke it. And I do think there's a huge responsibility on the clubs. But we do have to, as Celtic fans, we certainly have to move on and hope that the club are strong enough and the authorities are strong enough to deal with the ongoing situation. I want to talk about Alistair Johnston. I want to bring in some of the comments. I'm going to start off with Lord Flashheart Plus. At 3 million, AJ seems like an absolute bargain. And the discussion that we're going to have here is not only around how well he has done. I mean, man of the match performance against Rangers. Some people said he was at fault for Rangers' second goal. I think collectively as a defence, we didn't deal with that well. He's only 24. €3.5 million from Montreal. He was getting the lowdown on Celtic from an ex-player, of course, in Victor Wanyama there. 34 caps already, which is brilliant for a 24-year-old. 15 appearances now for Celtic. And Steve Guppy was talking about him during the week. He was talking about the fact that he actually coached them. He did coach him at one of his previous clubs. And he says that one of his main attributes, and I think we've seen this, is his one-to-one ability. You know, when he's just facing a player, you think to yourself, Johnston's going to take this. It doesn't matter who he's up against. He's got a great ability just to stop the attack. And also, he's crossing. And I think that as well as the brilliance of Johnston and the fact that he's really been taken to the hearts of the Celtic fans very quickly, I think it also shows that, you know what, even when we lose somebody that you don't really want to lose, it gives us a bit of confidence, Peter, in the system and the strategy that we've got in place right now, that, you know what, we don't want to lose someone who contributes and someone who's a great player at Celtic, i.e. Juranovic. But even when we do that, we can trust that Ange's got a replacement lined up, can bring someone in who will either equal what we had before or even match it. So it gives you a bit of confidence, doesn't it?
Well, that's been his sort of like ethos since he came in. It's like, we'll buy these players, we'll sell them at the right price, and we'll have people in the door ready to go. And that's what we've seen. So it gives you confidence. If that wasn't happening, you wouldn't buy into it. But it is happening. So somebody like Juranovic leaving, I thought he was brilliant. One of my favourite players. When you see a player like that, so skillful up and down the line. And then you've got even Giakoumakis. I loved Giakoumakis. He was like one of my, probably my favourite striker. I was calling him for play again ahead of Kyogo and stuff. But when I see O coming in, you know what I mean, younger, you're getting profit for these players, and then you're buying maybe even better players and younger players to replace them. And Alistair Johnston, he's got so many attributes that are equal, if not better, than Juranovic. Juranovic might be easier on the eye going forward and stuff, but what Johnston's got, he's got really good crossing, and his defending he's probably one of the best defenders. When you see a defender that you just know you're comfortable with going 1-on-1 against, you know he's not going to get beaten. Like Ryan Kent at the weekend and stuff, he's taking him out wide, but you don't fancy Kent going by him, and that he's one of their more like tricky players. So, listen, it bodes well, and I suppose we have to get used to this. We've got a few favourite players just now, Hatate, things like that, and I don't wish them away whatsoever. There's some amazing players, and you would hope they're going to stay for the Champions League and beyond that. But I think Ange is a type of person that just prepares maybe 6 months down the line. He's probably got people lined up for the summer, probably knows who's coming and who's going. And I think for me, I'm happy selling players if you can make a profit and can you equal or better the player that you've sold. And as long as you do that, you're continuously getting stronger, you're continuously making money and putting the club in a really good position.
Yeah, absolutely. And the evolution continues. I think the first time we're getting to know Ange Postecoglou, Matthew, and you know, it gets to the end of the first season, and Tommy Rogic and Nir Bichon are allowed to leave. And at that time, I think combined, they had about 17 years service at Celtic. So you're like, that's a lot of experience to be leaving the club. But what he had done, like Peter says, is he had already brought in a couple of midfielders in the January window who had been bedded in, and Matt O'Reilly and Hatate. But then he brings in Moy. And at that time, you think, really, is Moy going to, you know, equal or better what we've had before? And Moy goes on to be a very, very astute signing. He's done the same with Juranovic, replacing him with Johnston. And, of course, he's done the same with O coming in. And it does. I'm a bit like Peter. I don't want quality to leave Celtic, but I accept that that's where we are as a football club. It's going to happen, right? And, you know, you've got to start seeing some players as assets, as long as they don't leave too soon. But it does fill you with a bit of confidence, Matthew, especially going into the summer transfer window here, that no matter what happens, we are going to be well placed. We've got a good team behind the scenes, and we've got Ange at the forefront of that, who'll be able to identify and bring in new talent and, you know, new heroes, because that's what Alistair Johnston's becoming.
Yeah, I think if you look at the way Ange has come in, you know, so Ange came in, obviously, you know, coming up for 2 years ago now, and you had that first couple of months where he was just really settling in. You know, there was all the chat. I mean, it seems like an eternity ago now, but, you know, when Ange first came in, you know, idea, oh, Celtic can't win away from home and all this type of stuff. But what he did after that initial bedding in thing, he's gone on to, you know, obviously to brilliant success. And I think if you look at his signings, that's basically what's happened. He generally brings people in. You know, they have a wee bedding in period often. You know, Moy's a good example. So Moy, a few games before he just became this guy's now just a first choice. You know, so much so that even, I mean, in fairness to Moy, I thought Moy wasn't fit at the weekend. I think we maybe rushed him a little bit. But it was the fact that this guy that we only signed in January, who's only really in theory meant to be a backup, is already somebody that we're like, we need to rush him back from injury, because he's just the central part of it. And I think what Ange has shown, that in every position that I think where it's clearly been an Ange signing, is a real ability to identify the top quality that we actually need. You know, the examples have been given. You've lost Giakoumakis now. In lots of ways, that's a problem, obviously. You know, he was a good scorer. He offered a lot to the team. But already, you know, looks similar. You know, he looks strong. He looks like somebody, you know, that's willing to sort of get involved. I actually think O's best game so far has been when he came on in the League Cup final. I thought when he came on in that, he really looked the part. You know, he looked strong. He was just what we needed in terms of the ability to hold the ball up at times. It goes without saying. I mean, the Johnston Juranovic switch has been utterly seamless, and so much so. And I really like Juranovic, but if you told me that Alistair Johnston, you know, if I arrived tomorrow having never seen a Celtic game, and you told me that Johnston had been here 4 years, was a mainstay in the team, I would absolutely believe you. You know, you wouldn't have any problem in thinking that this guy was anything other than somebody who's been here, not just, you know, for a few weeks, but for the whole season, and even longer than that. So I think that Ange's ability to identify people that are going to blend in is important. And I think the wider thing, it's not just about ability, although this is really important. You get the impression that everybody that Ange brings in fits in well in terms of getting on in the squad. Because obviously that's hugely important, you know, especially if you're coming from all over the world, you're coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages. It's really important that the squad is a welcoming one where you actually, you know, you feel that you're part of things. And I've seen a few things on social media, but pointing out, you know, I think when Jota's go in, the reaction from Carter, Vickers and Johnson to that goal, and it's just utter bedlam and it's utter delight. And I think that gives you the idea that within the team, there's a really good spirit. And that hopefully is one of the reasons that whoever you bring in is able to sort of become part of that.
Yeah, sorry, Peter, on you go.
What Ange sees is he sees Celtic for what it is and what it can offer players. So he's went to find players that can buy into that, and but he's not just went to England and sort of the general things that we've generally England and France and stuff. He's went all over the world, found the players that are right for him, and he knows that they'll get the club. And they've came and everybody's bought into it, and it just shows. And what also I like is that he has bought players that haven't worked, whether it was him that bought them or under his sort of like tenure. But we seem to get rid of them quickly. We've realised that they haven't worked, and we're not keeping a big squad of players on big wages around. We're getting them in. Has it worked? No. And then they seem to be sort of happy to move on. And I think that's something that he'll be looking to do during the summer with a lot of the loan signings we've got out, sort of trim the squad and stuff. But in general, that's what's happened. He's had a high hit rate of success with players, but also there have been players, Abelgard and things like that, certain players that haven't worked, but they've moved on. So he seems to be pretty forthright with players, tells them what he expects, and is straightforward with them. And they seem to sort of buy into it.
Yeah. I think one of the words that he may have used before was aggressive, like an aggressive approach to the transfer strategy, whereby, like you say, if it's quite clear, it's not going to work for Abelgar, for example, we'll move you on and we'll do it quickly. Even Jens, I might have raised a few eyebrows because I think there had been some quality shown from Jens, and there's been some quality shown by him since he left Celtic, but we can't guarantee you the game time maybe that you expected, therefore we'll cut that deal short and on you go. And I'm sure there will be quite a few of those loanees that we spoke about yesterday who will also be leaving the building during the summer transfer window. AJ SC Tech, hello from Chile Rostock in the Bundesrepublik. I'll tell you what, we get around, so thanks for tuning in. And Paddy Lavery also coming in from Ardoyne. Great to see you as always, Paddy. We've also got Paul McLean. Statement needed on the 30th of April in the Cup. They have the same attitude they had when they cheered to draw in Celtic in the semi 2018. Well, that's another thing we spoke about yesterday, was the fact that, you know, all the kind of bluster that we've been hearing since the weekend, if they truly believe it, if they truly believe that, you know, we're not that far away, and I'm hearing pundits saying Rangers can sign 3 or 4 players in the summer to bridge the gap and all this, as if Celtic are just going to stand still. If they believe that, I'm absolutely delighted with that, Matthew, because that talks about the complacency that you and I discussed earlier. You brought it up. If they honestly believe it, brilliant. Let them believe it, because I know that Ange isn't going to believe that kind of hype. He's just going to keep his own backyard in order. I mean, going into that game, we've heard that we're going to see the real Rangers. Well, if you see the real Celtic, you know, that's going to be a completely different animal as well, isn't it?
Growing up, so I mean, I got my first season ticket in '92, although I've been going since the '80s, and I used to hate. Obviously, Rangers dominated, you know, the majority of the 1990s, and I used to hate. We got the Celtic view religiously, and I hated it because almost every week you'd get these nonsense statements. Rangers are going to find out what we can really do. You know, this is going to be the time when Celtic are going to stand up. We are going to make a statement. And almost inevitably, there'd be some amazing performance from Andy Gorham. Brian Laudrup would score the winner. And you can talk the talk all you like, but afterwards, we would slink away, you know, like knowing that we'd lost while they were left to celebrate. And that's a bit like I feel whenever I hear a lot of the chants. I mean, if I was a Rangers supporter, I would hate hearing the chat of we're going to show them the real Rangers, because all that means is you're losing. You know, you're not going to see a Celtic player turn around and saying, well, in this upcoming semi-final, we're going to show them the real Celtic, because we don't need to, because the real Celtic are 12 points clear. The real Celtic did win the League Cup final. The reality is we already know who the real Celtic are. The team that, you know, is potentially, you know, 2 cup games away, you know, obviously a few league games away from a treble. So I think the reality is the more that you hear people in blue talking about how, you know, next time you're going to see the real you, it's just a reminder that so far they've lost. So like you say, Paul, the more we hear that, the better. The more that we hear, you know, like chat about how the next time, because that's what I hope. I hope that all we hear all summer is hopefully after a Celtic treble, but this season's going to be different, you know, because this season we're going to show. Because again, if that's all we hear all summer, that's just a reminder that we did fantastically well. From our perspective, again, I think the complacency thing that I mentioned earlier about the semi is important. The reality is, Ange came in, was widely ridiculed. You know, Ange, who he's going to be gone by, you know, he's not even going to see Halloween and all the stuff that we heard about Ange. And obviously, we now know, you know, just irreplaceable, like, in terms of, you know, where we are just now. So I think there's an aspect of us not being complacent. The reality is, clearly they are going to make big changes over the summer. There's clearly going to be, I'm guessing at least 5 or 6 players in and out of Ibrox over the summer. Now, the impact that has, I don't know what it's going to be. The key for us is what you hinted at. The key for us is that we aren't standing still. The key for us, which we won't be, is that Ange is looking and saying, well, maybe there's 1 or 2 players need to move on. Maybe there's 1 or 2 positions, not so much where we need to move on, but we need, extra, we need extra competition. From a personal perspective, I'd like to see us sign a right winger. I think that's something where perhaps we, you've got Jota that's more reliable. We don't really have an out-and-out right winger. We've got people, in fairness to Abada isn't, I think, a natural right winger. That might be where he gets played. Maeda, I don't think, is a natural winger either. So I think if we want to be able to shake things up, there are positions I'd like to see us sign. But the reality is, you sit and chat with mates, you sit and chat on things like this. Ange knows all these things as well. And as long as he's focused on that, then, as I say, hopefully all we're going to continue to hear down Ibrox way is, next time they're going to see the real team.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it takes us on to that point, Peter, and I'll ask you your view on it, because we've got a regular contributor in Danielle who comes in on a regular basis, who is determined that we need a new goalkeeper. I have said that I think we definitely need to strengthen in that position as well as up top. And Matthew thinks maybe somewhere on the right-hand side. And particularly as well, there's been a lot of speculation around Abada. So maybe the player that we have been deploying in that position perhaps needs replaced. Where do you think we need to strengthen come the summer months, Peter?
It all depends on who goes out, who goes in. Let's just say we keep the same squad. I think you could still add in the midfield just for extra. I mean, it depends what level you want to get to. Is Iwata the player to do that? Do we need somebody else? But I think the real big positions, probably, I think you need to look at the Hart sort of position. I like Hart. I think he's done really well. I think he's a solid enough shot stopper. Listen, anybody was better than Barkas. So, anybody could have come in at that point. But if you want to look at it in Europe, if we want to play the style of football we want to play, high pressing, keeper coming out, ball at his feet, Joe Hart can be a wee bit sort of sticky, a bit shaky with that. I'd be happy if we kept him. But if we can go out and identify somebody that's a bit younger and has a high ceiling, then I would love to see somebody coming in. Again, depends what happens with Abada. I would like to see him stay because although it can be frustrating, sometimes I think his numbers are really, really good. Can you just go out and buy somebody that's going to give you the numbers like that? I don't know. But again, if you get a good offer for him, you would need to take it. But I think right wing, because I think Jota's best position is the left. He's done as a turnout on the right. He's done well, but his best position is on the left. I think when it comes to Rangers games, he's always playing Maeda because Maeda is just that workhorse that sort of stops Tavernier getting forward. Mm-hmm. He's always going to play Jota out on the right, I think, on their games. I'd like to see more for Haksabanovic because I think he's got something to offer. But again, a lot of these wingers are more to the left-hand side, so I think that a huge hole in the team would be the right wing. And possibly, I'm not too sure about Bernabe. So I don't think he's very good defensively, but that's just my opinion. So if Taylor was to get injured, is Bernabe going to be good enough for the Champions League? So do we bring somebody in at a higher rated player at left back? I don't know, but it's because we've spent a lot of money on him, so it would be a big call.
You're right, though. If we had a game tonight or last night, a massive European game, and Taylor didn't make it, would you be at this stage confident that Bernabe could handle it? And I don't want to write anybody off, but at this moment in time, I wouldn't be 100% confident in him. So I think it's a good point. And one other thing I would say about Joe Hart is beyond the performances, and this goes back to something you mentioned earlier, Peter, about the actual personality, the character of the player that Ange brings in as well. I think you've seen a massive part of that in Joe Hart. I think there's loads we don't see behind the scenes, but by all accounts, he's been a massive leader behind the scenes. A couple of wee incidents even to mention. I remember at Dens Park where he's basically bundled Juranovic into the net to stop him from getting sent off. He was the guy that came right out to grab McGregor when there was a bit of needle between him and Barisic at the weekend. He's done that a number of times. He's the type of goalie who'll say to the referee, sort this out, or we're going to take the team off the park at Ibrox when he's found shards of glass in the goal mouth. So I think all of that kind of leadership that we were really lacking when Ange took over has been key in our success. But now you start getting into the performance side of it, and you think, can we then get someone in better? And like you say, somebody we can buy him with a high ceiling, because Joe Hart wasn't that type of signing. He was someone we needed. So we weren't thinking about sell on value, get him in the building, let's get the leadership, let's get the defence settled, you know.
I heard Ange speaking about, you know, in this first season, he knew the pressure was on, he knew he had to try and win. Although it was a huge transition season, I don't think we really expected too much from that season. But so he knew that he needed like immediate success. So that's why he got people like Hart, maybe Juranovic, Giacomakis, sort of older players with a bit of nous about them. Again, with Hart, he's been amazing. I totally see everything with like he's basically a captain on the pitch as well. So it would be hard to lose that. But if Ange's got the team to where he wants it, he's won two leagues, a possible treble, then is it time to start looking at actual bringing top quality, maybe younger players in to play the style of football that he inevitably wants to play, and maybe take us to the next level? Because that has been the talk about it. Like, Ange never stops, and he's going to keep going until he gets a certain level through the team, and we don't even know what that looks like. So we're loving what we're seeing just now, but where could it go if we keep improving? So I love Hart. We'd hate to see him leave, but it'd probably be a position you would have to look at.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we're talking about trebles. I come from a similar era to yourself, Matthew, whereby you certainly started going to the games before I did. But I think, you know, when you're talking about not the views and suffering the 90s and all that kind of stuff, yes, absolutely. I lived that with you. And it's not a Celtic da moment, by the way. More a kind of Celtic granddad I'm getting, never mind a Celtic da. But talking trebles now, I never will take them for granted, because like yourself and Peter as well, and many people tuning in, first treble I seen Celtic winning was under Martin O'Neill, and then we definitely got the knack of that, you know, fairly recently, where we won 4 in a row. And we're now talking about a treble, like realistically looking at the situation and saying we could win a treble here. I did have a belief in Ronnie's first season that we could maybe do it as well. So I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, we could win a treble, but I don't take it for granted. But what I'm seeing, a lot of discussions around that is, oh, you know, this Celtic domination is no good for Scottish football. And they're trying to obviously look at the reasons why and where Scottish football should go. And I come from the kind of school whereby, yeah, when I look at that league at the moment, you've got a team like St Johnstone there that's had a level of success, cup success in recent times, not doing so well just now. You've got Motherwell and St Mirren who are doing fantastically well, but I don't regard them as top Scottish clubs. They're just doing really, really well at the moment, as are Livingston. But let's have a look at some of the challengers or some of the bigger clubs. It's maybe a discussion that's a wee bit more kind of like of a debate as to who are the biggest 6 Scottish clubs. And I don't see it as being an issue with Celtic. I see it as being an issue with the clubs in question. So if you look, for example, back to the 10th of June 2021, when we appointed Ange Postecoglou as our manager, Rangers since then not only have had average losses since 2012 of 11.1 million, but they've had 3 managers in the time that we've had Ange Postecoglou. Aberdeen, 3 managers. Hibs, 3. Hearts, going to be 2. And Dundee United, now people might say they're not one of the top clubs, but, you know, growing up in fan base, and if you were to say who your top 6 are, not just on league position, but everything else that goes around it, you know, I would argue that Dundee United should certainly be up there. 4 managers in the space of time that we've appointed Ange. And I think there's a lack of stability, Matthew. There's a lack of kind of medium, never mind long-term planning. Yeah, all I hear is other clubs moaning about Celtic and domination and demanding tickets and this and that. And I think it's about time these teams need to take a wee bit more responsibility for their own failings. I mean, the situation that Hibs going through, Jack Ross, Maloney, and now they're on Johnson. Aberdeen, for me, it looks as though they found their man. Will they make it permanent? Who knows? And it's just all about, for me, these teams taking responsibility for their own actions and their own performance.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, obviously, Barry, it's interesting the way that a manager can have an impact. So obviously, if you look at where Aberdeen were under Goodwin and you look at the impact under Barry Robson, I have to declare an interest here. I love Barry Robson. I just think he's one of my favourite Scottish players that we've signed this century.
He was a bit of a cult. He was a cult player.
Oh,
yeah, definitely.
I really love Robson. It's just it's a bit of an ongoing joke amongst friends. I'd love Barry Robson to be a great manager and to one day come to Celtic Park, because I really liked him as a player. So I'll declare that interest. I think I don't know. I think that there's an element, as you mentioned, St Johnstone are not doing quite as well just now, but St Johnstone for a long time were really the sort of the ideal model of where a team, certainly out with Celtic and Rangers, and even arguably out with the traditional attendance-based, top 5 or 6 in Scotland, of how to run a team. Obviously, St Johnstone, they've got a good ground, they've got their training areas. They had real stability. It sort of felt like every time St Johnstone lost a manager, they just kept going. It didn't really matter. So McInnes left, Tommy Wright left, and every time it sort of felt like they would go on. And obviously, it's just great in recent years. I mean, I know the double cup success they had will never quite be, perhaps as enjoyed as much by fans because of COVID and all the rest of it. But it's still been a remarkable time they've had. I think there is definitely an element of you can only beat what's in front of you. I think the wider question when it comes to competition is, it's funny, I've done a couple of threads on this on Twitter in recent times, but looking at, historically, what decades has this competition existed? Now, undeniably, the most competitive decade in Scottish football history was the 50s, probably followed by the 80s. The 80s could have been even more, were it not for Albert Kidd, might have been even more competitive in terms of the number of teams that won the league that season. But I think if you look around Europe just now, I suppose there's a question is, what counts as competition? How much competition is it actually possible to have? Because the reality is most of your bigger leagues in Europe, your top 5 certainly, and then even then if you go down to sort of what would be the next level of ourselves, the Dutch, the Belgians, and all the rest of it, there's perhaps a bit more competition. There's more than 2 winners, but there's not, in the last 10 years, 9 different winners in any of the other major leagues in Europe. So I think the reality is there has always been a Celtic and Ibrox team dominance within Scotland. I think at one point, if you go back to just before World War II till, in fact, before that, in fact, if you go back to the early 1900s to almost World War II, Motherwell won the league, and that was the only time it didn't happen. So this sort of run, obviously, it's what 85, the last time that a non-Celtic or Rangers team won the league, and that is obviously a very long time. It isn't totally without precedent, though. But it's not completely without precedent in the sense we've had similar runs where maybe there's only been one team. In terms of how you address that, I think you're right. I think stability does count. St Johnstone for a long time, to me, were the ideal model. They clearly had a structure in place, both in terms of the budget they had, in terms of planning ahead for if this manager leaves, who do we think might clearly be feasible? And that really paid big dividends for them. I think some of the so-called bigger teams, that's when you would question it. The Hearts' decision to get rid of Nielsen, I found bizarre, not necessarily for them doing it. They've obviously, Hearts have been on a really poor run, but doing it without an obvious replacement. I could understand Hearts making the decision that, well, we're going to get rid of Robbie Nielsen, the guy who, let's face it, just a few months ago was the hero who was going to deliver, definitely third place, a future Scotland manager. And to suddenly go from, well, we've lost a few games, you're out the door, and we don't have a replacement, I think is very strange. And I think you're right. I think if you're actually wanting to challenge Celtic, I suppose you put Rangers in there in the sense that obviously they won the league a couple of years ago. Then yes, stability is what counts. And as long as clubs are making what often seem to be fairly, decisions that don't seem completely planned out, that's inevitably going to leave them struggling.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. We were hearing from Hearts and their fans that they believed they could not only come between Celtic and Rangers, but they could challenge for the league. And in the same season, Peter, we've got a sacking. Robbie Nielsen's been sacked. And that lack of stability, I think, Hibs and Aberdeen, and I threw in Dundee United because I think, historically in my lifetime, they've been one of the top 6 clubs. And it's just been knee-jerk reaction after knee-jerk reaction. I know it's part of the modern game to a degree. But if you want to use St Johnstone as an example, I think a club similar size, similar fan base, similar size stadium is Dunfermline Athletic, and look where they are. They're in the 3rd tier of Scottish football, albeit they're doing really well, and the look as though they're going to win that league and come back up to the championship. But if you don't have that stability, that's what happens to you. You can falter by the wayside, when you go through a succession of managers, it doesn't work out. And the managers bring in their staff and they bring in their players. That doesn't work out, and it's a refresh constantly. But I do think there's a fair bit of bleating goes on, Peter, and it's always the big 2 clubs. It's always our fault, as Celtic, because what would you rather every now and again we say, we're just not going to be dominant. To get that domination, and Ange speaks about this all the time, is not easy. That's a 24/7 mentality, every single moment of every day being a winner. To maintain that level of success. Is it about time some of these Scottish clubs actually lived up to their billing as one of the top clubs? Hearts being probably the most recent example.
You've got huge clubs like Hearts, Hibs, and Aberdeen that just don't seem to be living up to what they should be. I think it's like a scattergun approach. The way a lot of these clubs, I get it. Maybe Jim Goodwin, because it was to lose against the opposition he was losing against it, but they just seem to be like a few games lost, a few losses. It's like that's it. You don't get a chance to even ride it out, to come back, refresh. How a manager's supposed to implement a style or get the players they want in when it's just 4 or 5 losses or a couple of draws here and there, and that's not getting you out the door, sort of thing. It's like, for example, if you look at Celtic, they brought in a structure, they brought in a manager, and they've had to go with him. Regardless if we won the league in the first season, we would have still had to buy in and go with it, because that's what you're seeing. You're seeing you want to see progression. So I just think it's a pretty cutthroat industry, and like a lot of managers are just sort of losing their jobs and not getting a chance to ride out the bad times. I mean, look at maybe smaller clubs in England like Brighton and Brentford and stuff. They've got different ways of doing things, different styles of football, but it can be effective. And there's some clubs, I think, in Scotland that need to look at that. They might not break, Celtic and Rangers up, but they could win a cup. They could turn up in these and have their own level of success. Do you know what I mean? So they can run their club properly. They can have a manager there for a few years and turn over players and things like that. So I think they should look at maybe these type of clubs in England. That's how they could have success. But I just think the way it's going nowadays, you just don't get a lot of time in management. If you lose a few games, the pressure's on.
Yeah, it definitely is. There is no doubt about that. Now, yesterday, it was interesting. It was all over a lot of news sources, Matthew, that Neil Lennon reckons that had Larsson been playing in the modern game, he'd be worth 100 million quid. You would have seen the headlines, which is that's fair enough shout from Neil Lennon. But it begs the question, who has been, or has Kyogo been? That's a leading question, Matthew. Has Kyogo been the best striker since Henrik Larsson to wear the Celtic jersey? And we had a wee discussion yesterday about the kind of records, etc. Kyogo's sitting on 28 at the moment. It looks like he's going to hit 30. Will he hit 35? What other players have done that? 4 in the last decade have hit 30 plus. Where do you rank him? Because we're talking guys like Moussa Dembele, Edouard, who never hit 30, but obviously was very consistent. Lee Griffiths, Chris Commons hit 32 goals one season, and Gary Hooper as well. So where do you place Kyogo in that list of Celtic strikers?
Yeah, I think you've just named a lot of them. I think if I was thinking since Larsson, so I'm not going to count Sutton and Hartson on the grounds that they obviously played with Larsson, but if you think sort of since, say, pretty much in the last let's say 15 years, last 15, 20 years. I think the four strikers that stand out for me, you mentioned one of them, Hooper purely for his finishing, was it, an absolutely fantastic one. Edouard and Dembele. I mean, often, before Kyogo came, the argument was always who was better between them. I'm always really on the fence. I probably err slightly towards Dembele. I probably, on balance, preferred Dembele. I thought he offered a bit more in terms of strength up front. But that's, it's one of those ones that was a real toss of a coin moment. I wouldn't really, if I had to choose between one of them and it came up to Edouard, that would be just as fine. Kyogo is undeniably the hero just now. I think it's hard to completely compare them because he's completely different. I think both Edouard and Dembele were much stronger. I think, you could give them the ball to hold up, and that's not really obviously what Kyogo's game is. Kyogo's game is really based a lot on his speed. I remember when he first came in, within the first few games, and we've gradually come to it, although I still think at times, I've heard Ange say this, that we don't do it. I think his ability to read or to see a run and make the move is what creates a lot of the chances. I think sometimes probably our midfield failing is that we don't always see what he does. And as I say, Ange spoke about that 2 or 3 times, that, there's a lot of times Kyogo goes away, there's a very obvious ball to him, and we've maybe not seen the ball that he thinks he's going to get. So I think just now, I honestly think if I was picking the last best part of 20 years, I'd go with those 4: Hooper, Edouard, Dembele, Kyogo. I honestly wouldn't like to choose, and I'm just going to say, let's just hope we get to enjoy Kyogo for a bit longer.
Yeah, without a doubt. He was in that category that Peter mentioned earlier of player who's, I'm not going to say older, because 27, 28 is definitely not old, but Juranovic, Giakoumakis, Starfelt, Kyogo, they were all roughly the same age, that wee bit older than some of the younger guys were brought in since then. But here's some of the comments coming through. Rab McNair reckons Dembele was the best since Larsson. It would be hard to argue. It's going to be tight, I think, to argue the toss there. Colin Jordan, Kyogo is the best since Larsson. And so it goes on. CJ, still in the Dembele camp. I thought Hooper was class also. Let's not forget Hooper. Brown Warrior points out that Hooper had a better strike rate than Edouard, Dembele and Griffiths. Dembele just above Kyogo. Obviously, Peter will have Henrik Larsson up top as well. And CJ, third. Kyogo's third below Dembele and Larsson, but it is close. It's all about opinions, isn't it, Peter? And I think that the one thing that I certainly noticed from the lists that we were looking at yesterday, the top goal scorer lists, is we're continually failing to produce our own striker. Celtic were famed for producing strikers. Strikers would come through and they were prolific. We've not done that for a long, long time. Is that something that you think will happen? I think, we had a discussion here. Here is a 90s moment for yourself, Matthew. We were thinking, was the last prolific striker we produced Jerry Craney? Was he the last one that we produced? Because he was prolific.
Yeah.
Nothing since then. Peter, can we do it again? And who is Kyogo the best since Larsson? What's your thoughts, Peter?
Well, can we do it again? You would hope so if we invest in the youth of some of the youth teams and B teams and stuff, they're seeing how the main team are playing. So if they can, because again, it's not just about are you the most skillful player? Do you fit in that system? And if you get a boy coming through that can fit in that system, then why not? Mm-hmm. It's something you need to look to do because it's a great way of saving money. You don't have to go and buy these strikers; just produce them. Look at somebody like Kieran Tierney and things like that. I mean, you would hope so. So you're just sort of always waiting and always listening to hear if you can hear of anybody. But we don't know just yet, and sort of time will tell. Since Larsson, I think you have to look at sort of the teams they were playing against as well. I mean, so Dembele and Edouard have a different sort of style than Kyogo. They could hold the ball up. They were probably a bit more silky. They probably a wee bit more skill. But I mean, who were they playing against? You had a weaker Rangers. They'd just come up from the Championship and stuff. They were rebuilding and things. Obviously, Larsson's untouchable. Hooper played against sort of that stronger Rangers team. So he was a great finisher. But if you look at Kyogo, you would say Rangers have just no long won the league. They're in a stronger position than they've been for a while. And you just have to look at what sort of the joy he gives you. When I first seen him, he was just constantly, he just didn't stop. I told my brother, I says, this Kyogo, I was like, he doesn't stop moving. I was like, he'll score about 70 a season. Obviously, that didn't happen, but I just love, when I'm watching it, you can see his runs, and you just think, going to play that, like you're looking at the midfield, just clip it, just simple balls over the top, because he's always making the runs. I do love watching him. He doesn't get involved in build-up. I don't think he's great in build-up, but what he offers going forward and how he stretches the teams, they're always worried, where is he? Is he going in behind, which inevitably is. I think when I look at Celtic, you just think when he's on the park, we've got a chance of scoring goals. And you look at a player like that in Europe, fair enough, he might not have done it in the Champions League last time, but he had chances. And that type of movement, you can't really buy that type of movement. Not a lot of people move like that, like him. So I'll go for Kyogo. Let's go for Kyogo. Nothing.
Yeah, and by the way, I am looking forward to seeing him in Europe, because there was plenty of people writing him off this season on European performances. So I really want to see him performing at that level again. Incidentally, if Kyogo, and I'm not counting my chickens, if he gets a couple of goals this weekend, that will be him on 50 Celtic goals. And if he gets a couple of goals this weekend, Celtic will have scored 100 league goals. That's bizarre. That's just 100 domestic goals. An incredible record this season for Celtic. Before we go, Matthew, obviously last week we were talking about your book. How's it going? Obviously the debut author. How's it going with the sales and with the interest in your book and the feedback you've been getting? And also, please tell all our listeners where we can find it, where we can buy it.
Yeah, the book's great. The book's going really, really well. So it's all about the first season that Celtic ever won the league. It's called The Bold Boys, Glory to Their Name. You can get it online now. You can get it from CelticStarBooks.com. Although I have to say as well, I really loved it this week, because I went and it's in the Celtic shops now. So before that, I had a double celebration on Sunday, because as well as Saturday, because as well as most importantly beating them, I went to the Argyle Street shop in the Celtic Park shop, and I saw it in all its glory. And it's great to go in to the Celtic shop and see your own book sitting right at the top, standing out and all the rest of it. So that was great. It's really interesting. As I say, there's been a really great response. The number of people, a lot of people have got in touch on social media, said they've really enjoyed it. There's lots of really funny things. I mean, I wasn't going to bring it up earlier, but some of the stuff we were talking about, referees. There's just lots of really funny stories. I mean, you mentioned the idea of full-time referees. Interestingly, the 1890s, that was proposed at that point as well, the same time that football became professional in Scotland. It was rejected then, but at the same time. And I have to give, one story that is very, very funny. In those days, referees weren't full-time, or rather, they didn't come from like an association. You gave them to another club. So, for example, if Celtic played St Mirren, then Hearts might provide a referee for that game, and so on. And interestingly, that season, one of the main complaints was that Rangers often got unfair decisions from referees. But a lot of the time, it was the Celtic referee who got blamed for giving Rangers the decisions. So I think maybe things have clearly moved on a lot in the last 130 years. But no, the book's going really well, and it's to say, if anyone's looking for it, then you can get it from Celtic Star Books or in the Celtic shop.
I did see it the other day. I was in there just on Sunday, and I saw it. It looks great. As I said to you last week, the front cover's smashing. Brilliant artwork. So, yeah, fair play to you. And hopefully anyone who wants a copy is able to get it, because generally they do sell out. The publisher does sell out their hard copies. So get in there and have a read about a season from about 130 years ago. Stevie Kenny points out Andy Payton. By the way, Andy Payton was no bad player for Celtic in hard times. I remember that goal he scored when the referee. I loved Andy Payton, and I think it was the game where the referee. I know, exactly. They blew for the game to restart, where the Celtic players were still over at the jungle celebrating. Crazy times. Now, the top behind us, actually, this is a Republic of Ireland jersey that we have. There's 16 signatures on it, including Roy Keane and Martin O'Neill. If you buy a ticket for our Alan Thompson gig upcoming in a few weeks, it's on the semi-final weekend, actually, the Friday night, then you will be entered into the prize draw to win this jersey. The links underneath this video. There's a few tickets left, but they are going very quickly. We've got Tomo on the Friday, John Hartson on the Saturday, semi-final on the Sunday. Not a bad weekend to get some live entertainment in Glasgow. Peter, I've got to say, fantastic debut. Johnston-esque debut. Thank you for joining us. Matthew, you've got 2 under your belt now. Hopefully you'll come in for a 3rd. I know that the last couple of weeks, obviously with Easter, it's been a wee bit easier for you, but hopefully we will see you in the future. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the comment section, and thank you once again, Matthew and Peter, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.